Last summer I was on a road trip with my cousin Andre. We were both in college at the time, but we went to different schools in the same state. We worked for the first 3 months of the summer, and then we took August off to relax and do a road trip. We were planning to drive from near Chicago all the way to California to visit our uncle who lived out there. It would be a few days' drive, but we had time and we wanted to draw it out a little bit. To make it a good experience, neither Andre nor I really liked planning ahead, so we simply set off and decided to figure it out. As we went along, we had planned to take a week to get there, so we had some flexibility in how long we could stay at each place. On the third day of our trip, we were already in Utah, which meant that we were ahead of schedule, so we decided to stay the night in a small town that neither of us had heard of before. I was driving while Andre was on his phone, searching for places to stay for the night. After 10 or 15 minutes of scrolling, all he could find was a small hotel that was way overpriced. It looked nice, but we were students at the time, and it was way out of our price range. Then Andre checked Airbnb and found a place for less than half the price of the hotel. It was a small house with just a single bedroom. Actually, it was just the main floor of a house, but the bedroom had 2 single beds, so it was perfect for us. I continued to drive, as Andre explained the place to me. It was about a 10-minute drive from a really small town, and it was really quiet. It was hard to believe that it was even worth having an Airbnb in that place. The area was not exactly a tourist destination either, so it was not at all surprising that we were able to get it on such short notice. Andre booked it and we continued to drive. It was only about an hour away by then. When we got to the house, we waited in the car in front, and Andre texted the owner. We were on a dirt road. The house was hidden behind a couple of large trees. Willow, I think. They looked really out of place in the desolate landscape. The house was 2 stories of yellow brick with light brown shingles on the roof. Neighbors were few, but there were several other houses in the area. Within a minute or two, an older man walked out from behind the house. Andre and I got out of the car and walked towards him. He introduced himself as Jack, the owner. He was a smaller guy, maybe 50 years old, with long gray hair and a bald top of the head. He was a white guy, but his skin was so tan from the sun that it almost feels strange to call him white. He seemed friendly enough, and we learned that he lived in the apartment on the upper floor of the house. We had the main floor. Once he handed over the keys, Jack disappeared behind the house. It was getting late, so Andre and I hung out in the living room and talked a bit, and then we headed to bed. I was having trouble sleeping at the time. I would never sleep all the way through the night, and it was even worse when I was not able to sleep in my own bed. So while Andre was fast asleep, I was tossing and turning at around 3 a.m. I heard a noise. It was the front door. It was a long, high-pitched creak as if someone were opening it slowly. I laid there silently for 30 seconds. Then I heard faint footsteps coming from the living room. I got up from the bed quietly and tiptoed towards the door, which was left open by a crack. I peeked out the door, and I could see the glow of a flashlight out there. Someone was there looking for. I could see the dark outline of a person, but I couldn't see any detail. That is until the flashlight hit the window, and some of the light reflected back. It was Jack, the owner, even more terrifying. I could see a gun on his belt. When I saw that, I retreated back to my bed and pretended to be asleep. There was no telling what that guy was capable. I realized how vulnerable we were. It was the middle of nowhere, and we were alone in a stranger's house. Andre and I never told anybody where we were. I guess if anything happened, then Airbnb's records would be useful, but I was not thinking about that at the time. I lay there for several minutes, shaking, almost crying, until eventually he left when I was sure he was gone. I woke Andre and whispered to him what just happened. We quietly snuck out of the house, went to our car and drove away. In the morning we went to the police station, but they were not helpful. I got the feeling they didn't like outsiders in that town. Our only recourse after that was to report it to Airbnb, which we did. Fortunately, he was banned from the site. After that, in the car the next day, we discussed Jack and what he could have been up to that night. He didn't come into the bedroom, so I guess he didn't want to hurt us. The only reasonable explanation was that he was trying to rob us, but since we didn't leave anything in the living room, nothing was stolen. I guess he wasn't willing to risk waking us up either way. It was a really scary thing that happened, especially when I saw that gun on his hip. I bought a house a few years ago. I lived in an apartment at the time that I really liked, so instead of moving into the house, I kept the apartment and put the house on Airbnb. I really bought it as an investment. Anyway, it was a half duplex near the downtown. So I figured it would be a good location for a short-term rental. There were plenty of tourist destinations nearby. It was older, but the main floor was nicely renovated before I bought it. It still had the classic charm of the 1960s on the outside, red brick with white window shutters. I never got to know the neighbors, but they were all college students, so I imagined we could go tit for tat on noise complaints if I wanted to. The basement was also original to the old. It was one dark, cold room with concrete floors and exposed pipes and vents. The ceiling was low, so it wasn't good for much other than storage. I didn't keep anything valuable down there, so when I put it on Airbnb, I didn't bother to install a lock on the door to the basement. Running an Airbnb was a lot of work at first, because I would have to make sure to be at the house to hand over the keys to each tenant. After a while though, I installed electronic locks on the door so I could simply text the code to each person or group. I always made sure to change the code each time. I had heard enough horror stories about old tenants returning to rob the place or terrorizing future tenants. It's well worth it to change the code each time, and my cleaner would do it most of the time anyway. The house was rented one weekend by a guy named Jens. He said he was in town with his brother and cousin for a bachelor party. By then, I had the system pretty much dialed in. I rarely even went to the house at all because I'd hired a cleaner to prepare the place for each guest. That combined with the electronic locks and the need for my personal attention was pretty much zero. When the time came, I sent the lock code to Jens in a text message. Then something surprising happened. He called me. "Hey man, it's Jens. It's okay if we have a few people over, right?" "Sure, don't get too crazy though," I laughed. "I mean, the neighbors won't call the police or anything, will they?" he asked. No, they're usually fine." I told him, then he hung up. I didn't think much of that conversation at the time, but in hindsight, it's very creepy. The weekend came and went without issue. No noise complaints from the neighbors. Not until Monday afternoon when I got a call from the cleaner. I answered the phone, and Joanne, my cleaner, was on the other end. She was in an absolute panic. She sounded like she was being chased by a pack of wolves. She begged me to come to the house to see what happened. I took the afternoon off from work and drove to the house. When I got there, I could see Joanne standing on the sidewalk a few doors down. I parked my car on the street and walked over to her. She had calmed down significantly, but she was still quite distressed. I asked her what the problem was, but all she told me was to check the basement. I opened the front door and swung it open. It was not as bad as I was expecting. There were some beer bottles and probably a few spilled drinks. The place smelled like a party. I was not that far out from college, so I knew what the aftermath of a rager looked like. It was like a 5 on a scale from 1 to 10. I walked through the house to the basement, and when I got there, the door was wide open, most likely left open when Joanne sprint. I walked down the stairs cautiously. When I reached the bottom, I hit the light switch. It was a single bulb in the middle of the room. When I looked around and I saw something out of place in the far corner, but I couldn't tell what it was. I walked over there, and when I saw it close up, I understood why Joanna had freaked out. There was a pool of blood on the ground as well as several bloody footprints leading towards the stairs. Possibly even more disturbing was that next to the blood was a large wad of bloody duct tape. I was pretty freaked out too, but I held it together and called the police. Then I headed outside to wait for them. When the cops showed up, Joanne and I told them what we found and where to find it. The house was closed off as a crime scene for a few days. Jens was contacted by the police, but he had an excuse for what was down there. Also, there were no corresponding reports of a victim, so there was really no evidence to. Because of that, charges were never placed. I did, however, report them to Airbnb, although we couldn't prove it. I believe that something sinister happened in my basement that night, and it gives me goosebumps every time I think of it. When I was in college, I had a dorm all to myself, which was nice at times, but sometimes I would get bored considering there wasn't anyone to talk to. All of my friends had a roommate, so I guess at times it made me wish I had one as well. But it is what it is. I didn't really mind that much. I'm a very laid-back and easygoing person, so I didn't really care a whole lot. Like I said, for like a week straight though, there would be someone that would come and knock on my door and then run away. I guess because every time I opened the door, there would be no one there. I was more annoyed than scared because I was sick of whoever it was that was messing with me. Eventually they stopped doing it though, probably because I quit acknowledging them. I don't imagine it would be very fun to continuously knock on someone's door and run away if they don't even try to catch you. The next day, my friend Avery asked if I wanted to go to a party with her. I'm not really a party person or someone who even likes to drink at all, but I was feeling very promiscuous. I was really stressed from whoever it was that had been knocking on my door every night. For the past week and a half, I had been losing sleep over it because it drove me that insane. I really wanted to take the edge off, and I was also feeling like breaking out of my shell. I was also bored, which I'm sure you could tell by now. I have nightmares about what happened at that party, but it was a blessing and a curse. So I don't regret going at all. Something horrible happened to me while I was there, but I had no idea that it was going to be the start of the rest of my life. More on that in a few. But anyways, the party that Avery was talking about was not the kind of party I was expecting. It was a dorm room full of people that were drinking, which I didn't think would be very fun. So shortly after I got there, I told everyone I was going to be leaving soon. And my excuse was that I had a lot of homework I needed to catch up on. They were all trying to convince me to stay, but I really didn't want to. Meanwhile, I saw some guy mixing up a drink out of the corner of my eye, and I saw that he put something in it. No way, he disliked someone's drink. I thought to myself, he had his back turned on an angle to me so he couldn't see that I saw what he was doing. I was completely zoning out over there in his direction. All while I'm not hearing a single word anyone else was saying to me. I didn't say anything about it until he tried handing it to me. I'm not drinking that. I saw what you did to it. You put something in it. Most of everyone in the room laughed at me when I said that, and he played it off like I was being crazy. Oh yeah, what's that? White foam-looking stuff at the top then, I asked. I then took the drink from him and compared it to everyone else's and showed him all that. Mine was the only one that looked like that. It clearly wasn't fizz either. He was trying to drug me. I think one of the guys there, who I assumed in the moment to not be in on the whole thing, realized I wasn't lying and stuck up for me. He got beat up for it though, from the 3 other guys that were at the party. I was very thankful for him, but I took the opportunity to leave. I ran to my dorm and started crying. I felt so bad for leaving him there, but there was nothing I could have done. I couldn't tell the campus police either because we weren't allowed to be drinking in the first place, and they take those rules very seriously. I've had friends that had been expelled before, just from getting caught with alcohol every day for the rest of the year. Everyone at that party tormented me and made fun of me for what happened that night. Even Avery started being fake to me. The guy who stuck out for me that night though, he became really close friends after what happened, and we would hang out every day. Well, now I'm married to him, and we have been together in a relationship for 5 years now. Been married for 2 years, also we have a daughter on the way as well. I'm 5 months along, and we are in a really good spot with life in our marriage, and we are moving towards a very promising future.